Welcome back to the Comark Equity Alliance YouTube channel. My name is Trent Milachik, Risk Management Advisor with Comark Equity Alliance, and today I'm joined by Dr. Amy Hagerman, Agricultural and Food Policy Specialist at Oklahoma State University. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Hagerman.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Dr. Hagerman, there's been a lot of, I don't know even how to say it, but increases in ad hoc disaster payments. I guess that's what I want to say. We went from a time, it seems like, couple decades ago where direct payments and things like that came out and they weren't really tied to disasters. It was just money flowing. And now we've gone to farm bills that are based on base acres and paying attention to what yields do throughout time and what prices do throughout time, and pretty complicated programs the way they go. And then we also have natural disasters that occur, whether it's drought or wildfires, that then bring about these ad hoc disaster programs. And a few of those that we've been dealing with here recently is ERP and PARP, and then ERP 1 and 2, and ERP 2 track 1 and track 2, and now you're smiling and laughing at me because
ELRP, don't forget ELRP.
ELRP, and we had WIP Plus before that. And am I confusing anybody yet? Because I feel like a lot of people are confused about what's going on and how these programs originated, what's the purpose of them, and why they're becoming more popular. So I don't expect you to answer all of that, but maybe we can go down a path of talking about, where have we been and where are we getting to with these programs?
Sure, absolutely. And I think it's important to realize that all of these different programs are motivated by different things. So, for example, specific years have different events. And the fact is that we have seen a lot of drought years in this last 10-year period that a lot of these programs have come out. So for us here in Oklahoma, wildfires and droughts have been our two big drivers for these programs. But also it does feel like almost every other month, right? You're getting some sort of application from your Farm Service Agency office and you're going, what is this one? And what is it for? And what do I do with it? And am I even eligible?
Electronic communications made that even easier for them, because you might get a text message that says, come sign up for this policy that's named very similarly to all the other programs, and you're left standing there as a producer thinking, have I signed up for this? Is this the same as something else I did? There's no deadline on this one, so I don't know when I'm supposed to do it.
Or they've already filled out your application for you. Just come in and sign it. And
My favorite.
And you think to yourself, is like, wait, what is this program? What am I even signing my name to? Right?
Well, there is some of that, yes. Yeah.
So it is definitely confusing, and different programs have different purposes. They can all be drought programs. There's a whole suite of drought programs, but each one is addressing some different aspect, for example, of drought. And so ERP is one of those programs. In an appropriations bill, some money was set aside to address wildfires and droughts, and this is the program that replaced the WIP Plus program, the Wildfire Hurricane Indemnity Plus program. The plus is drought in that. So we had WIP, and then we had WIP Plus, and now we have ERP, and we had ERP 1, and now we've had ERP 2, and ERP 2 comes in two different tracks and two different phases.
I heard the terminology of phase 1, phase 2, track 1, track 2, and it gets complicated.
And you'll see in the language on there, it will say, and if funds are available, we will offer a second track. This is becoming really common, and that's really a lot of the reason we end up with these track 2, track 1 payments, is they do a track 1 or a phase 1, right? You can get those words confused. They do a first round of this program. And they say, okay, have we run through all the money that was set aside in this appropriations bill? And if we haven't, well, then we're going to open it up and sort of like, you can think about it like layers, right? We're going to do a layer 1 on this phase 1, this first round of this program. And if we have money left over, then we're going to come in and add another layer on top of that. And so we would see the first one is associated with your crop insurance, kind of a top-off payment on your crop insurance. Well, then we come in behind that with a payment if you got more loss in that calculation associated with that. So that seems to be a trend. Even if we look outside of disaster programs, we can go back to the coronavirus food assistance program. same kind of thing. We did one round of CFAP, and they said, oh, we've got money left over. Okay, let's do a second round of CFAP and address any sorts of losses that we didn't address in round one. So, but it makes it really complicated because it's hard to see the big picture in how these different losses have been broken up into these buckets.
It makes you wonder, again, the philosophy of the thought process is a lot of times what I come to, and I try to advocate on behalf of the farmer when I think about these programs. And they have the program come out, you calculate your loss, you do all these calculations, and then maybe they say we'll pay 75% of that.
Yeah.
And they also might sequester it by 85%. So you're getting 75% of a calculated number, and then maybe 85% of that 75.
Yeah.
Why are they doing that? And it makes you think they don't know what participation will be. They don't know what the actual loss possibility is. They basically got funding approved, and they want to help as many people as they can with that funding without being able to really know what the loss was.
Right.
So determining an individual producer's loss is really complicated because it all depends on their specific situation, like how you compare to your neighbor, to the person 10 miles down the road, even within a single county, which is kind of the lowest level of data we can actually get to estimate a loss. It's really complicated to try to figure that out. And I think that's what they're trying to do, is account for, number one, we can't dedicate to pay more than the money we have. And that is important, right? You don't want to sign up for a program and then somebody come back and tell you, oh, sorry, we ran out of money. You're not going to get a payment. But then also, it's really hard to predict what those actual numbers will look like once they calculate it for an individual producer, because those applications now, so many details of your individual operation go into that calculation.
Yeah, I mean, I know most farmers got into farming because they wanted to be accountants and bookkeepers.
Right.
So it should be easy.
Yeah, numbers. Who doesn't love piles and piles of forms and numbers?
That's an unintended consequence, because there are some producers that spend quite a bit of money on accountants or tax preparers to help them with some of these applications. So I'm sure that's an unintended consequence of some of this, and trying to make it as accurate as possible versus attainable.
Yeah. And I think that's universally true. Businesses are just inundated with forms and paperwork universally right now. I don't think farmers are alone in that sense, and leaning heavily on a good accountant, a good lawyer, a good banker, those relationships, a good crop insurance agent, those relationships to help them navigate this whole system. And that would be my encouragement to people as they're looking at this form and they're saying, do I want to apply for this program, is to reach out into that trusted network of people for some advice.
Yeah, so probably ought to have J.C. Hobbs here, the Oklahoma State tax specialist, but we can talk some about that, where these losses are based off of tax year revenue and losses, and anyone who knows farm taxes will know that,
which are few people.
Yeah, but the cash accounting standpoint of most people use for their Schedule F taxes does not lend itself to incredibly accurate representations of farm profitability and farm expenses.
No, I think USDA really thought that this would be an easy thing for producers. Oh, you just go to your Schedule F, right? That it would just be really easy for them to reflect their losses onto these applications by going into their tax forms. But I think over time they're going to find that there may be some different ways to do that maybe even more accurately reflect those losses, because timing matters a lot whenever it comes to taxes. Your taxes don't always reflect the timing of the loss, because some of the expenses and some of the incomes all fall into different years from when that loss was.
And I would have to guess some thought was given to that, because we did see using 2018 and 2019 as benchmark years, and you choose the year you want to use as your benchmark. But especially in Oklahoma and Kansas, where you have cow-calf producers, stocker producers, some are retaining through the feedlot, then you have rotating crops, double cropping, various things, pre-purchase of expenses.
Yeah.
There can certainly be years where you sell your calf crop and then you go into the next year and you retain your calves into the next tax year, and you don't have any cattle income during that time period to offset expenses, or crop failures or bumper crops.
Right.
When you choose to put on, if you put all your fertilizer on in the fall, or you cross that calendar year and you top dress and you spend more money, then all affects how revenue flows on a Schedule F.
Absolutely, yeah, and that gets really challenging for then applying for these disaster programs, because you really need to calculate if we're thinking outside of programs, thinking outside of our taxes, any of those things. If we're really just thinking about practically when these losses occur, usually they occur across multiple years. If we think about a drought and we think about the consequences of drought, the chances that it will stay very tidily in a single calendar year are pretty slim. And that's when it starts to get a little crazy, because we're trying to cram things into calendar years or into crop marketing years, but the loss is in the crop marketing year, but the program is based on a calendar year, and it just all starts to get really complicated.
Yeah, especially with winter wheat. I mean, when you're crossing calendar years with that production cycle, it makes it even more difficult. But kind of going back to how these programs start off, can you kind of build us a timeline of how we went from WIP and WIP Plus to ERP1, I believe, to PARP, to then ERP2? You want to walk through some of that?
Yeah. So WIP Plus, we were in that 2018, 2019 time period. 2021 is when that funding went into place that actually took that drought program off of what we call CCC funds, which are those discretionary funds that USDA can use for disaster programs and ad hoc programs, onto these funds that were very specifically built for this reason, for drought and wildfire and hurricane events. So that's in that 2021 time frame.
So when funds are specifically proportioned like that, is the idea that interpretation kind of goes away and they have to be driven to this one idea? Or what is the benefit of that?
It's more what the money has to be spent on.
Yeah.
And so USDA was then tasked with designing a program that spent the money on these kinds of losses.
Okay.
So as we get into 22 and 23, right, that's where we start getting to this ERP phase 1, ERP phase 2. Now we're in ERP phase 2, track 2 in 2024.
Okay.
And then we had the last pandemic assistance program. Of course, in this whole timeline, we had all these pandemic assistance programs as well. So we had the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, and then we had this Pandemic Assistance Program, PARP, that was out, about a year ago. And so that complicates things as well, because you had this track of disaster funding for drought, for weather-related disasters. But then you also at the same time had this track of funding that had to be spent for COVID-related market disruptions. And then, if we really want to throw some complications in this since 2018 timeframe, we had the market facilitation program for the trade war disruptions that happened in 1819 in the same window of time.
Money was flowing. Yes. Yeah, it's amazing. But came at a good time for a lot of producers in this area, though. I mean, that saved a lot of balance sheets with that emergency funding coming through. So it's a double-edged sword where you get the funding, and I feel like, especially with ARC and PLC, there's some concerns about the timing of when that funding comes out. Marketing years are long. It takes a long time to calculate a loss, and then you got to get yield data in, where these tend to get paid faster, but then you have to deal with, it's going to be more work on the producer, and there's more legwork there.
Right.
But do you have any tips on this most recent program? So that's ERP2, Track 2.
Yes.
That producers are hearing from FSA about. Most people have already got the email or got the text message. They've got the stack of paperwork that's the instructions for the worksheet. So the worksheet can fill out box 2B.
Yes.
A lot of complicated stuff going on in there.
It is a lot of complicated stuff going on in there. And I wish I had a tip for how to simplify it. But I just don't. It's not a simple program. It is a complicated program. And so it's just reading everything very carefully, setting aside that time, read everything very carefully, ask any questions before you start filling that application out, making sure that as you think through that ERP2 track 2 calculation, just asking yourself really honestly, do I think this is going to be more than what I received under track 1?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an important question to ask, just to think through it before you invest a lot of time in filling this application out.
Right.
Do I really think there is a difference between the two? Because a really critical piece is whatever you calculate for this track 2 as your potential payment, they're going to subtract out that track 1 payment and you get the difference. It's meant to be, again, one of these top-up payments to the first one. So just letting yourself just kind of sit back and think through it logically and think to myself, is this worth getting my accountant involved to help me do this? Because that's not an inexpensive proposition.
Right.
Or, is it worth setting aside a full day to just work through this application? And letting that be worthwhile. Reaching out to, for example, the OSU Extension area economists. We miss you. And
that was a position I used to hold.
And helping them work through
Yeah.
Through those questions, asking questions about it. Where do I look for this information? Using that worksheet. So all the tools are there to do it, but it takes a pretty significant investment of time to do it.
So thinking through it, when I've looked at those programs and I've applied for them up to this point, and kind of working on this last one personally, and kind of working through it, you're going to need your 2018 and your 2019 Schedule S.
Yep.
You're going to need your 2022 and 2023 Schedule S. So a lot of people had to wait till after the tax deadline to even fill this out because you needed 2023.
Yeah. You're going to need your ERP to track 1 final payment and application, so making sure you have a copy of that.
Yeah, and I found that's not the easiest thing to get a hold of if you don't have it. So again, as you're filling out applications moving forward, keeping a copy of that yourself and turning one in is going to be incredibly useful in the future, because I think these programs are going to continue to build on themselves.
It seems to be the trend, that this is the trend we are in right now, is that we do have these multi-phase programs. So it kind of just going into it thinking about, yes, I need to keep everything that I put on this first application. I need to keep a copy of the application that I turned in because, well, first of all, you may get a question that comes back from our service agency about it. But then also, it's possible if this is going to be a multi-phase program, I'm going to need that information to then apply for future phases.
So you have benchmark years, which is 18 and 19. So the benchmark years are what the term benchmark, that's what you're starting with, a benchmark revenue that you're comparing in track 1 was 2021 and 2022. Sorry for the slurring of that, but 2021 and 2022. So you... makes the most sense. You would pick whatever year got you the biggest payment, and you would pick whatever benchmark year was the highest and whatever reference year was the lowest.
Right.
Well, then we move forward now to this track 2. We have overlap, 2022 and 2023. And the way I read it and understood it was if you use 2022 as your reference year, you have to use 2023.
Yes.
So knowing that information.
So you're not double counting.
Yeah. I'd hate for you to fill out the whole application and realize that you made a mistake because you'd already used 2022, and then you have to go back and redo it all. Or when do you find out that information? It all depends. You don't want to put yourself in that situation.
Yeah.
But also thinking through those benchmark years, there's provisions to adjust your benchmark year to be representative of your current farming operation. So a lot of us have changed our farming operations from 2018 to 2019. Some have gotten bigger, some have gotten smaller.
Right.
If you've gotten smaller, you have to adjust your 18 and 19 revenue to account for the loss of acres as you reduce the size of your operation. There is also a provision in there to increase your benchmark years if you have increased your acres over that time, correct?
Yeah.
So just stop me anytime I'm wrong here.
So far, so good. You're reading off the instructions.
So when you go back and you're trying to adjust 18 or 19 to be representative of your current crop or your current farming operation, you got to increase acres and you have to assign revenue to those acres.
Right. Yeah, which is not straightforward.
No.
To do.
And in the most recent instructions, they're different than in Track 1, where they become more critical and saying reasonable yields. That might not be the exact verbiage, but there's talk in there about prices and yields and something that's reasonable for your operation. So it's I'm not saying the first one was pie in the sky stuff, but it wasn't incredibly clear about what numbers you were supposed to use. There wasn't necessarily a benchmark there to make those determinations.
And I think you have to kind of reflect on it from a higher level at the national level of why they're going down this pathway. There has been a big push to do greater justification for any kind of spending at the federal level right now. So they're holding USDA accountable. They want justification for why something is an actual loss and the levels of payments going out to producers. They got a lot of criticism, especially in 2020 during the COVID-related payments, that they were putting out these very large payments. Why? What is your justification? And so the pendulum has kind of swung this other way, that now USDA is being taken to task and having to justify these programs and payments. And that all flows to the producer. And then the producer is going to have to put greater justification into that. Because then they can come back and say, hey, look, we required these adjustments so that we're not overpaying producers that have changed their operations substantially. We have put in, these fail-safes to make sure that we're not overpaying someone or double paying them for what they've done. So kind of to a higher level, I think this comes to a trend we're seeing right now of real pressure to justify spending at the federal level. And then that's being reflected in what we're seeing in terms of programs here in, county levels and in those offices. But again, it's a lot of complication in these programs right now.
I'd say more than ever. I mean, oftentimes signing up for FSA programs has been call 2 or 3 neighbors, see what they did, and do the same thing. This one is not that way.
No.
Read the instructions, read it again, maybe 3 or 4 times. I did.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of comprehension to understand what you're doing.
Set aside a day, really, to spend to make sure you've got all the different pieces that you need to do this. And then, aside from that, I think you have to be really careful, because at any time, Farm Service Agency, definitely not trying to scare anybody, but at any time, Farm Service Agency could come back and say, hey, what evidence did you use to justify this? We need your paperwork that you based this on. So keeping those records after you've applied for a program, keeping them together somewhere that you can go back and access them for a number of years after you've applied for the program, keeping that copy of your application. I mean, record keeping is always important, but in the past, maybe record keeping wasn't as important for some of these USDA programs because, hey, it's all on file with USDA, right? You know that they've got everything that they need on this. Well, these days it's probably not a bad idea to have those copies of everything that you used.
In the event that you're audited, you don't want to rely on the FSA office to produce those records for you. Because at the end of the day, if you can't prove it, worst case scenario, you have to pay that money back, and generally in a disaster year, we needed the money.
Right.
so having those funds there available.
It did what it was supposed to do. It went to pay for the expenses it needed to be spent on.
Yeah, and record keeping is important, but consistency of record keeping as well.
Absolutely.
It's being able to justify why you did things and the purpose you took in filling out these applications. Some FSA offices required turning in that worksheet. I don't know if I ever read that it was a requirement to turn in the worksheet. I don't think
it is a requirement, but some offices ask for it.
But some ask for it, and I think that's probably good practice, because having that on file is going to be useful, because a lot of this stuff you're going to flush out of your mind right after you apply for it and move on, and you might not remember why you did it.
You moved on to the next thing that you have to do. But also, it makes it easier to apply for future programs if you've got that documentation. We talked about base acres, you and I, at another point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you've got all of that information that you've saved up and applying for these different programs, well, then you just have to pull out those pieces
Right.
when we start talking about Farm Bill program updates.
Well, Dr. Hagerman, if they're still with us at this point, I think they're well versed. But
Yes.
it's a complicated program.
It
So
is a complicated program.
any final words of wisdom for our producers as they fill out these applications?
Read it once, read it twice, read it 3 times. Make sure it's a lot of fine print, but it is worth reading just to make sure that it's understood what the program is and how to fill out those applications. It's not very many boxes at the end of the day, but it takes quite a bit to get to the information that goes in those boxes.
Right. And you're more than willing to speak to producers.
Absolutely,
We'll
yeah.
We'll include your contact information
Yes.
there. So producers
Appreciate
can get a hold of you. Any of the RMAs, myself, Matt, or Mike are more than willing to help out as well in any way that we can. But again, sometimes the more eyes you get on something, the better it is. And
Yeah, reach out into that trusted network, for anybody. Have your trusted network of people that you can call if you just have a question. And I'm happy to be one of those people for anyone who needs it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us on the channel today. We really appreciate you reaching to us for the information on signing up for these programs and all of your grain marketing needs. If you like the content, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. It really helps our channel grow, and share it with your friends if you feel like they would benefit from the information. With that, Dr. Hagerman, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.